This last panel is being led by a good friend of mine, someone who's been on my podcast, our podcast, someone that I've known for, probably 8 or 10 years, Jory Desjardins. She doesn't say this about herself, but she is the co-founder of this thing called Blog Her, which is kind of a big deal. And every time I tell someone that, they're kind of blown away by that. She is like a moderator extraordinaire. And sorry, I've gone too far on my paper. I'm like too eager to get to the finish line here. Because I want to make sure I get the title right of the session. And she's the Chief Marketing Officer of Countable. They're going to talk about big tech and how it's changing the face of healthcare. Not a shocker there, but I think you're going to get some interesting sort of perspectives from a couple of amazing veterans of the industry. And I don't mean veteran by anything other than they just have seen a lot that's gone on. So with that, Jory, you want to come up and join us?
All right, I'm on.
You're on.
Thank you, Aaron. I am excited about this panel for many reasons. I've gotten to know my co-panelists, but because I've been in tech for so long, my feeling is big tech gets everywhere, and it has taken on a lot of different things. I come from the community world, and we've seen what communities have done and tech has done to our data and how we aggregate and how we need to adjust and fix a lot of the wrongs and things that have happened because of tech. But I've also learned how it has affected the medical world as well. So I would like my co-panelists to introduce themselves and share a little bit about how you are engaged with both big tech and in the medical world. We'll start with Robin.
Ladies first. Okay, so let me just start by saying I'm so happy nobody's going to tell me to turn on my mute button. I have turned off my mute button. I am really happy to be here in person. Robin Raskin, many careers, but probably most notably the editor-in-chief of PC Magazine when it was a magazine you got in your mailbox. So I watched the Internet 1.0 come to life. Then I got into the events business where I ran the Digital Health Summit for the Consumer Electronics Show. I was lucky enough to sell them that business with a bunch of other properties right before the pandemic, and now run something called the Virtual Events Group, which is about how to make better meetings wherever they happen. Metaverse, Marriott, or Mars is what I like to say. But I still run their digital health conferences for them and still write a lot as a journalist about the big trends for tech and medical.
Hi, my name is Han Pak. I'm a dermatologist by training. I'm a veteran also. I was in the military for about 26 years. Oh, it's not working.
Yeah, I don't know what it
All right. I would say I had 3 parts to my journey in my career. First journey was about access to care. So I was part of the early telehealth kind of movement, doing the studies, going out there. And then I learned that value-based care was coming, and cost of care was a very significant factor to providing, obviously, good quality care. And so I moved to 3M and really tried to work towards helping measure and creating tools by which healthcare organizations can move into a value-based arrangement. Then in my career at Samsung, it's really about the patient. Because as a physician, it's really humbling when you sit there and I can be 100% right both in my diagnosis and treatment, and patient, if they don't trust me, it goes to 0, right? No good medicine matters. And so I think my part of my journey now is really about that last mile of healthcare and really trying to engage that patient in such a way that it would make the hard things, the right things, easier to do.
And just a word about Countable, my new company. So Blog Her was, I would call it Community 2.0, and Countable is Community 3.0, and trust is the intersection there. So what does community look like when we have our data privacy? It's a community engagement platform for different stakeholders. They could be patients, doctor communities. It's a safe environment, and we help to power actions across those. So they could be powered by a shared purpose. They could be powered by a shared passion. In the case of patients, by a shared condition, by caregivers, doctors. So we're looking at how community can be dimensionalized in a way that is safe, effective, and actually does reach the needs and helps to inspire action through community. So with that said, let's go back a few years. Now, Robin has seen a lot in this space, especially in health tech. Could you just set the table by helping us to understand what are you seeing and what are the trends that have evolved in health tech over the last
I think
10 or so years?
I think the biggest trend is it's now a partnership. You know, like everything else, take fintech. When the fintech companies first started, they thought they were going to take over banking. They were just going to take over the banks. There would be no banks. They learned how to cooperate and work together. And what tech did was make it more accessible. They found a wider audience. They found better tools. I think health is the same. I can name a few big tech companies that really thought they were going to own health. They were going to own the entirety, from pharmaceuticals to probably hospitals, and that they now know it's partnering with traditional health companies, providers, doctors, hospitals, and giving them the tools they need and facilitating it. And I think in the pandemic, you saw this. We had a worker shortage like we've never had before, and it was tech that really stepped up their game, from voice assistants to robotics to continuous monitoring and sensors of one sort or another, that we literally could not have existed if tech had not been ready to jump in and take care of the shortage. And then I made this list, and as a journalist, some I grade them. Some things we've done well, some things we haven't. Personalization, it's getting pretty good that you can get a drug regimen or a diagnosis that is based on your biomarkers or your personal constitution, the other drugs that you take. So good grades there. What I'm excited about, not that I don't love my doctor, but I love that medical care has left going to the doctor's office and is more in your community. And I give big thumbs up to CVS and Walmart and the urgent cares and people who have given people more access to go in your community and not have to travel hundreds of miles away. Do-it-yourself health, good and bad. It's really great that we know everything about ourselves. It's really bad that sometimes we self-medicate, that there are online services that are questionable in their metrics and results. Telemedicine, this was so great, especially during the pandemic, but at the end of the day, right now, I give it a rating as it is nothing more than a HIPAA-compliant phone call. And until we have the hardware to measure, stick in your ears, stick in your heart, get some diagnostics, it's very hard for any doctor to make a diagnosis over a phone, and it's leading into some issues. I'm going to let Han talk more about precision biometrics, but at CES this year, we saw strips that you could pee on, and you could get your markers for a whole bunch of different biocriteria. Smart toilet bowls that you could go to the bathroom and have them analyze your poop. And so I think, and
Is there a demo? I'm just curious.
and probably the most, and this is, but to go back to your last panel, this is all stuff you can do now. We just need the appetite and the market. But I think the most fascinating thing that we should talk about is the idea of a digital twin. If you walk around South by, everybody's talking about the metaverse and being there, but very few people are talking about what it means to health. What does it mean to have a digital representation of your personal body that can be what-ifed and simulated and experimented without touching you at all first, and based on the most personal information. And I think that's, there's lots of ethics involved that we'll talk about later, but that sort of sums up this year's 2022's Digital Health Summit at CES. And I know you were just at a different health summit where some other issues cropped up.
I did. I think that was a great summary of the major trends. The one additional thing I would add that came out of VIVE, which is the first Health plus Chime conference, was around digital health equity.
Yep.
So Office of the National Coordinator made an announcement on their focus on this. AMA came out with a focus on health equity along with Chime. And I think this is really as a result of many different findings that really leads to a mindset in healthcare that tools are, or thinking that tools are neutral, meaning that it doesn't have a bad intent or good intent. It's a tool, but what we're seeing is unintended consequences where the AI is potentially using data from a demographic that is more about the Caucasian and different demographics, which then when applied to other or a broader demographic, then the findings actually create bias. Or there are clinical trials that you've heard of, what happens there. And so in these, and then also, developing digital solutions, thinking it does amazing things, and then finding that it's only going to the people that that have internet, and not thinking through the entirety of the solution. So I think that we have a social and an ethical responsibility to think broader about how we think about digital health or technologies, and how do we do that. So I'll give you an example. We have a remote cardiac rehab program with Kaiser Permanente, and we've about 15,000 patients that we've served. And the traditional way in which cardiac rehab is done, patient has a heart attack, has surgery or managed, and then has to do this exercise program that lasts 8 to 12 weeks, requires you to come into the hospital. Only about 25% do it. But if you do it, the mortality rate and the complication is like significant. We're not talking about subtle 10%, like significant quality of life and outcome differences. So then we did this remote thing for 15,000 patients, and then we started comparing the demographics. So the outcome went from 25% to 75% completion, which is huge. So that means thousands of patients' lives were saved within that group. But what was more important is that demographics shifted, because the technology had LTE in the watch, and it was a wearable-based program. And what was interesting is because we provided the whole package and made it easy to onboard and didn't have to rely on their internet maturity or access, the demographic shifted like 10 times of what was in traditional. And so that, again, do we think about all that in the design? No, but I think what we're beginning to realize is that we really have to have a mindset, and it has to be front and center in the way we think about it.
So I just sat in on the Tristan Harris keynote, and he talked about how part of the problem of big tech is that people who are building it have a certain mindset that they can't get out of. And what occurs to me is that this very same mindset of growth at all costs, do it because you can, it does have the potential to permeate into health tech, particularly around data. And then, of course, I'm thinking about Theranos, right? The goal there was about growth at all costs, but now we're talking about people's lives, not just an inconvenience with health. How do you think you will tech, but also every day, Samsung will have to start thinking about growth in the tech framework? And has Samsung really started to dig into that?
Yeah, I think we haven't fully yet, but I think you and I had this conversation briefly, but I think what I've come to realize as we approach the home, because that's the next battlefront for healthcare, right? We've moved from hospitals, ambulatory care, and now to the home. And so now we're thinking, all right, we have presence of devices, whether it's TV, a refrigerator, we have the smart things which act as a hub, we have all these things. So then how do we make sure that we're not using these things inappropriately, or someone else using the data inappropriately. So I've been thinking a lot, and the Social Dilemma movie really kind of, I don't know, it spoke to my heart in that I think it made me question, what would it look like if it was flipped on its head? Meaning, what if humanity was part of the design of technology going to the future, particularly as it comes to home and particularly in relationships? So what do I mean by that? We all have biases, right? We all don't like to admit it, but we all of us have some bias. And what healthcare is doing inadvertently right now is around getting behavior change or addiction to get you to do X, Y, Z, play more games. Or in order to have you exercise more, we want to take certain behavioral science and then try to get you to do those right things. But what we're not doing is to say, we all have gaps, we have imperfections, and instead of allowing those biases to be exploded, which is what is happening with AI now, what if we actually accounted for that and try to help support that gap so that we become better humans? And I think this is a conversation that really requires multiple stakeholders because I think we have to, we think about safety in terms of software development, right? And we think about other design principles, and I think in this case, healthcare is very relational. It's about people. And so I think it's so important that we start having this conversation, but I think we're early in the time.
Yeah, and I would add, I think the first step, it's always what you see in public, and the more data you get, the less bias you will have. So you see the CVSs and the Walmart getting involved. You can get your glucose levels, and there's a lot of things. When that moves into the home, it gets really interesting. And I shared this with you on the phone. I actually put in a bunch of sensors for my mother. And I said, Ma, you just stick the sensors up, and I'll run the software from my end. And there was one on the bedroom, one on the coffee pot, one on the bathroom. Well, she messed it up. And I called her the next day. I said, Ma, are you like going to the bathroom a lot? I keep making bathroom jokes. But I said, are you going to? And she goes, no, and you have to get this thing out of my house because I don't want you to know. So it turned out she had flipped the sensors and put the wrong one in the wrong place, but we all knew too much about where she was going. Your car is has information about your health now. It could be a lifesaver.
Well, and in this, it correlates for me as a marketer to advertising technology, where it was so good it could follow you anywhere, and sometimes it could give you an ad that actually was relevant. But you want to make sure that this data truly is additive and not creepy home, as we were kind of joking earlier, right?
But you will, this trade-off has existed forever between privacy and benefit. And it's going to keep existing, even more so as technologies like CRISPR and genetic things, come to the fore. And you are, in general, in this country at the moment anyhow, I think, the benefits of letting Alexa, sorry, is she here? Knowing where I am is pretty good. I think there's things actually inside of her that can make me healthier, but I can never find them when I need them, so discoverability. I'm wearing a Samsung watch now, and I probably know about 25% of what it can do for me because I just haven't had time to figure out the other. So I think those are the places that technology, and I'm sure you're seeing it at Samsung. I'm seeing more mixed teams of storytellers, graphic designers, philosophers, linguists, really get together. And I think it's that cross-pollination of academics that are really going to help us create a new generation of products.
Han, can you tell us a bit more about what Samsung is focused on in the healthcare area?
So broadly speaking, I don't know if you know, but Samsung does everything from biologic development or manufacturing to radiologic equipment, to called Neurologica, to Samsung Medical Center in Korea, to most of you know about consumer electronics, which is the device, and then we have a semiconductor division. Within the healthcare specifically, I would say probably 3 or 4 areas that is worth noting on the wearables. The wearables are really moving and maturing, not only ours, but other competitors, from a fitness device into now a device that is kind of smelling and looking like a medical device, a true medical device. And then over time, I think it's going to surpass some of the medical devices that's typically inside the walls of the hospitals. What do I mean by that? So what typical hardware medical device can't do is do continuous measurement on a body. And think about blood pressure as an example. Right now, as a doctor, as a dermatologist, I don't do this, but as a typical doctor, we do blood pressures when you come into the clinic in the hospital, and then we use that to extrapolate and say, we think your range of blood pressure seems to be this. I'm going to give you a medication because we think you need to be lowered or whatever, or make some adjustment. Well, it turns out when you actually do continuous monitoring of your blood pressure, there is actually a fluctuation within a given day. And there's something called a nocturnal dip that's supposed to happen, and if it doesn't happen, you're at risk. There's all kinds of variations, and imagine if you actually were collecting that. That's fundamentally changing blood pressure management or hypertension management into hemoglobin A1C equivalent is what will happen. So I think the wearables maturing into digital biomarkers in various different phases is going to be fairly significant. In 5 years, we're going to look back and say, what happened there, right? And so that's one. The other is really around all these devices that, appliances, TVs, tablets, mobiles, and really being a multi-device engagement tool that really access smart IoT and to bring about ecosystem by which you can then provide insights, not the bathroom thing, but essentially, making us better, going back to that, being able to detect your emotions and mood changes in your parents and giving them a little encouragement, right? Or letting us know, because we're so busy in our daily lives that we forget to look left and right to our families, and maybe those nudges or understanding of context is what's going to help us be better people. And so I think in the home, connecting these devices that we have, I think is another thing in healthcare. And then we're doing lots of other things in terms of, things in the hospital, really using patients, like what we call interactive patient care at the bedside. The tablet is not just a healthcare device, it's actually you order food, you watch entertainment, and in the same way, I think that kind of capability is going to come to the home, and it's going to be a health hub by which it's a remote control. It's also your ability to order food, right? It's all things around wellness, deliver content around healthcare. So I think those are some of the areas that we're excited about.
Yeah, and I think what Samsung has done, and well, Valencell just did a cuffless blood monitoring, this continuous monitoring for diabetes, and when to administer glucose now. That's just a little Band-Aid kind of thing on your skin. But what you've done, and I think what others are doing, is tying together the wearable data with the first step of prescriptive health. So your blood pressure's high. It's not going to work in extreme cases. You're going to have to see it, but meditating, being reminded to go out and take a walk, get away from your desk. Those are the first steps towards this do-it-yourself care, but this self-care that is, and wellness, which is now meeting health. And the results, wherever you look in the studies, are fantastic in what a little jog in the right direction, whether it's a food label that you can do with your QR code when you're supposed to stay away from fats. So I think the ecosystem is kind of getting rounded out because the applications are being developed for the hardware.
And the ecosystem, I would add, is allowing companies like VizIQ to take our data, develop their own algorithms, and start doing predictive. So, for example, long COVID. So they were able to look at various different physiologic parameters and say, this patient is now at risk for long COVID. And so you can imagine stroke, you can imagine Parkinson's disease, you can imagine all these things. Instead of waiting until the event happens, you begin to predict that certain risk, and that's when it becomes very exciting, right? And I think we are in that early part of that journey.
So you've said numerous times data. And when I think about big tech and some of the criticisms of big tech, it's usually around data and treatment of data. How can the healthcare life sciences industry learn from big tech? What are some of the lessons that you think they can take away before it gets dangerous?
I think all of us are trying to figure it out, to be honest, right? But I think each company, depending on their business model and their core, have different views on data. So let's not assume big tech all has a unified view of what data means and how to protect it. Because Google, by inherent design, is a data company, right? And they are going to monetize the data through ads and others. That's just their model. And so they're pushing, as Facebook, to use that data because that equals growth. Samsung's a little different in that we're a device company first. Our data rights and policy is on-device, patient-owned, patient-controlled. And patient has to opt in for some of the applications in order for us to store it, not an opt-out. And so very different, and it all depends. And I would love to say, yeah, that's great, but it also has disadvantages in that I would love to use the data for certain purposes, personalization and otherwise, but I'm limited just because of the way Samsung has approached data. I think the truth is that these two worlds are the truth is going to be somewhere in the middle, right? Because at the end of the day, big techs, once you lose trust of us, it's done, right? You're not going to be able to get that, except you would have to take a long time to rebuild that trust. So for me, I think that there isn't one lesson other than trust, and that's hard-earned.
So the layer one, I think, is kind of easy. It's anonymizing the data. Like, so how did Kinza thermometers be able to pinpoint where COVID was going to happen next? Through aggregate data that was anonymized. So that kind of, I think there's not going to be a lot of pushback on, you don't know who I am, but you can have my heartbeat, go for it. But then the next level, and I don't know the answer, but I'm going to ask you, what the blockchain. So if I can have various blockchains and say, okay, motor vehicles department, you can know who I am. You can know that I'm 21. The bar can use it when they need me to get in. My doctor can have access to certain things. My insurance company cannot. And do you think we're going to get there at some point where we can start to have our own personal ID that gives out those permissions across a spectrum? Or am I just daydreaming?
No, I think all the pieces are there. The technology is there, actually. It's a policy really that's prohibiting, and then a business model, right? So I'm part of the U.S., or I'm leading the U.S. U.S. Digital Life team, in which digital wallet is part of my portfolio. And so in there, we're thinking about, the typical things like credit card and so forth, but really where it gets interesting is the convergence of pay, health, blockchain, ID, and all of a sudden you start doing things like HSA, FSA, and all the friction around high deductible payment, and being able to really help consumers to be able to manage their healthcare cost. And so I believe that the pieces are there, and it's our intent to do that through the wallet as a beginning piece. But once you say ID in the United States, I mean, that brings up all kinds of conversations that I don't want to get started. It's way too close to happy hour, so.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
But we'll be checking your ID before a drink.
Right. But blockchain is interesting, and there is healthcare in the blockchain, and it's an emerging area that's growing, and it's all around identity and having data sovereignty to pick and choose who gets access to your data. So this was a question that I asked Han when I met him. What does a CMO do, a chief medical officer do in a tech company?
So so I'm trying to figure it out. So that's the short and the right answer. And what I mean by that is, I think if you go to any tech company and you lined us up, right, and ask the questions, you're going to get 10 different answers from 10 different people. And it's all because it depends on what the core of that technology company is, its culture, and what it's trying to do. So I think the best that I would say when you try to then lift it up and say, what are we doing? Well, it's really strategy, a contribution to strategy from a healthcare perspective, number one, and influence, kind of the go-to-market strategies and knowing the complexity and all that, because typically big techs don't understand the payer, the pharma, the PBMs, and then you can see the executives just like rolling their eyes. They're like, all they see is risk, right?
Yeah.
And so part of it is just thought leadership, right? Just providing where things are going in healthcare, regulatory events and policies that are changing. And then it's really about looking inward and saying, how do you create a culture around digital health equity or aligning all the health assets in a coherent way to be able to tell a story and prioritize what things we should go after. So I think most people do that to some degree in some various proportion.
Yeah, no, I'm laughing because I was thinking CMO. They got rid of all the initials you could use, so they had to call you guys CMOs. But you're right. I was just talking to the CMO of Withings. A very different story. It was a scale that gave you some body fat things, but now the new version of it has a pull-up thing and actually puts current through your body and can tell you which muscles you're using, which muscles you aren't, where your fat is stored. Just had to stay within their product focus of what they can develop that is a medically valid device that they can bring to an audience. And so I think a good CMO really understands their company's product line and knows how to expand on it, explain it, and carry the flag for it.
So
I think she's more qualified than I am.
The CMO. We have reached the time, I believe. So Han, Robin, thank you.
Thank you. I guess it is happy hour.